Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Conscious Health Podcast. We have my co host David Ortega with us, and we have a very special guest called Sara Cahill with us as well. I'm so excited. The title of this podcast is called The Healing Journey of Your Feelings. And Sara has an amazing host of modalities to support us, but I'm just going to quickly read out your quick bio, and then if you could tell us a little bit more about your journey and how you got to where you are. So Dr. Sara Cahill is a chiropractor in Iowa who's been practicing Gonstead technique for the last 7 years. Through her own experiences, she's learned how healing happens on many levels in different ways. She also now utilizes craniosacral fascial technique, CFT, neuroemotional technique, and human design to help her clients achieve more mental, emotional, and spiritual health along with the physical. Her ultimate goal is her new business, Seeds, is to allow women to honor every part of themselves so that they can move through life with ease and alignment. She's here to help women put down what they no longer need and move forward in a way that leaves them deeply understanding, loving, and embracing who they are. What an amazing purpose. What an amazing mission. Sara, that's so amazing. How did you get to this? Tell us a little bit about your journey.
Well, I sadly feel like this is not a short story, so I hope you can buckle in. I mean, I think that my life has been a lot of like following the trail of breadcrumbs. Like the older I get, the more that I see like this path has been laid. Like it was just for me to like discover and move along. I mean, starting way at the very beginning, even with my first experience of chiropractic, I think I was in fifth grade, and my mom got a new job with new health insurance benefits that covered chiropractic. So we really didn't have any reason to go other than it was suddenly covered. So we went and saw that chiropractor, and my brothers and I all suffered from seasonal allergies. Theirs were more in the spring, mine was more in the fall. And we started going over summertime. And I have not had seasonal allergies since then because of the work that that chiropractor did. So that experience always stuck with me. I even going into like high school, I liked science. I loved learning about the body. Like learning about math was fine. Like I could learn math, but it was never attached to anything meaningful. And like, but learning about the body and how the cells divide, and this is happening all the time, like literally within me, like that lit me up. I was so excited about that. So I went for biology for my undergrad degree. I kind of really didn't I actually, when I was first asked about what I was going to college for, I didn't even like think about it. My mouth just opened and I said chiropractic. And I was like, wow, that was really weird. Like, I didn't know that that was even on my mind, but I don't have a different answer. So I'm just going to roll with that. And then the more that I dug into it and the more exposure I had to it, I was like, oh, yeah, this is perfect and awesome. So I especially with the Gonstead technique in particular, it's a really, really specific way to practice where we're really trying to zero in on only the problematic areas of the spine. Sometimes you can go to a chiropractor and they adjust like the same things every visit, or they adjust like 10 things on your body at once. Whereas we're going to really like hone in and figure out like no more than 3 areas of the spine at a time that really need adjusted and worked with. So the reason that we do that is just because we try to honor like turning on the body's systems essentially. And if you overload that system, it's not going to get you the result that you want. So, I mean, even fast forwarding to when I was in chiropractic school, I came off birth control when I was in school. And I didn't have a cycle at all for 2 years after that. Like I just didn't, I assumed, well, at first I was like, this is probably kind of normal when you're first coming off of it. But then 2 years go by and I'm starting to get like terrified that I'm infertile. So my chiropractor, who is my boss now, is a very good friend of mine, but it took me a long time to muster up the courage to tell him about my lady problems. I was like, I don't know, like, but I hope that I'm not infertile. I'm kind of freaking out. Like, and so he checked my spine and like still using that technique, but he adjusted one segment and my cycle came back and it was like perfect after that, perfectly on time. So chiropractic has done a ton for my healing over the years, but it also has never been like the only thing, which of course no one thing is the only thing. When I moved to school, I moved far away. I live in the Midwest in Iowa, and I went down to Atlanta for chiropractic school. So you couldn't get to a different kind of like social, like even like like actual climate, like a more different place from there. I didn't have any family there, didn't know anybody when I moved down there. And really soon after I started school, I broke out in hives. So they were all over my chest right in here. And they really kind of came out of nowhere. And I had hives one other time in my life after running through a cornfield. So that's such an Iowa thing to say that I did. But like the pesticides and things must have just irritated my skin. I remember going to urgent care. They gave me steroids. It went away. It was all good. So I was like, okay, I've had hives before. Like I must have gotten into something weird. So I went to urgent care. They gave me the steroids that lasted 10 days. The hives were gone. I was like, perfect. We're all good. Except on day 11, they came back. So this happened a couple times where I was like, oh, maybe I just need them a little longer. And that wasn't the answer. And then this was kind of my first experience of getting the runaround in just like the traditional medical community of seeing different doctors who not only weren't able to give me an answer of what was going on, several of them did not seem to want to either. They were just like, 90% of the time we don't find out what gives someone hives. And I was just so frustrated because I was like, well, how am I supposed to like address this if I don't know what's going on and don't know what's causing it? So, I mean, that in itself was a whole long experience. But I had a professor in school he was our nutrition professor, and his whole spiel, and he had his own clinic in Atlanta that was all about healing chronic disease through diet and lifestyle. So I was like, all right, this is going to be the guy who has the answers for me. So I need to go to him and like figure out what's happening. So I went to his office hours and had what I can only describe as a complete and utter emotional breakdown while I was sitting across from him and just telling him about how stressed I had been, how upset I was, like what had gone on. And he was great about just sitting back and letting me do my thing. And at the end, he was like, I think it's just stress related. You should probably just relax over break. And I wanted to flip his desk over. I was like, okay, well, that was actually not even a little bit helpful either. This was supposed to be the guy who had the answers for me. But ironically, I left his office. Later that night, before bed, I realized like my chest was totally clear. The hives never came back after that. So it was an emotional release of some kind. It wasn't really necessarily facilitated in any direct or like purposeful kind of way. But that was like the first time that I was like, oh, like that. I didn't even realize that was something that could be so healing. So that experience always sticks with me as well. And then over the course of my life, I've had other symptoms that come up that just continue to point to emotions or choices that I'm making. I was having really, after my cycle came back, probably like 7 years after that, I was having really painful cycles, like really debilitating back pain, like lower abdomen burning pain. It felt like just like a belt of fire. And it was like worsening with time. And I eat really well. I hydrate well. I move well. Like I do all of the right things. But I was in the wrong relationship. And then once I ended that relationship, all my PMS symptoms went away as well. So it's like, okay. So again, looking back, like, how did I not like realize that I needed to do some more of this? Like, I guess I was valued doing it and like having it done for me, but I didn't really realize that this was something that I could bring to other people. So I most recently had, and was really the catalyst where I was like, all right, like I have to add in some more of these guys here. I had this like stomach pain that was sharp and stabbing, like right next to my belly button. And this started probably about this time last year. And again, it came on with my cycle. But it was, and at first adjustments would help. Like it would, if I felt it coming on, I'd get an adjustment and then it would clear out and it was fine. But as the months went on between January and June, it continued to get worse. It lasted longer than just my cycle. The pain got so bad that even to do a physical adjustment with my right hand was nearly impossible. Like it almost dropped me to the floor a few times. I remember I had a baby that was on their belly and I was standing behind them and they just kicked their leg right in that spot and I almost threw up. It was so bad. Like it was just getting to a point where I was getting anxious to go to work because of that pain being so bad. Again, after my whole hives experience, was pretty disenchanted about a lot of the medical community's answers. And I was convinced that if I went to see someone for that, they were going to tell me that my gallbladder needed to be taken out. And I was just not willing to hear that. I was not willing to do that. So I reached out to a friend who does NET because at around that time, I also had gone through a very intense breakup. So it was a very deeply emotional experience anyways. And I remembered that she had done NET even back when we were in school. So she did one clearing on me using that technique, and that pain was gone and it did not come back. So at that point, I actually in my life had been already feeling that I was being called to adding something else into what I wanted to offer people, because chiropractic, again, can be so healing, but it's just not the only thing. And I have had enough experiences to know that. But again, I just didn't feel like I had come across the thing that I was supposed to do to help people until I had this NET done. And then I was like, okay, this is a protocol that makes sense to me. I actually already learned it in school. Like, I'm going to revisit that. So that's really what brought that all around, with especially like honoring the emotions and letting them be expressed. It just makes so much sense that when that emotional energy is trapped within your body, of course, it's going to set the stage for dysfunction and then ultimately disease to come on when all of that trapped energy is not being put to good use in the body. So that's my very, very long answer of getting around to how I got there.
That's fascinating. And I love that journey of like how it's shown up for you. Absolutely. Can you tell us a little bit more about the technique of NET? Like how does it work? Like, yeah.
So a lot of it is based in traditional Chinese medicine. So they use what we call meridian access points. So the meridians are like energy highways through the body, and they all like interconnect with each other. And then they utilize points on the wrist. So points right in here, and then on the thenar here, and then same on the other hand here. So each of those are access points to the different meridian lines, like wood, earth, water, fire, and metal. So they're all based on the traditional Chinese medicine elements. And each of those elements correlates with certain organs within the body. And then each of those organs is correlated with different emotional frequencies. They just kind of vibrate at the same level. So utilizing this, we figure out which of the meridians is like in need of support. So using that, we do muscle testing. So we're basically bypassing the conscious mind by asking the body what's going on. So I can do this virtually as well, where I can muscle test myself for another person. When I have somebody in front of me, I like to muscle test them, because sometimes I think people think this kind of stuff, like, is it really real? But like, you can feel the difference between like a strong muscle test and a weak one. So utilizing the different strong and weak tests, we get to the root of what is basically what's the element, what's the organ, what's the emotion, whose emotion is it? And then you build a little bit of a story around that. You kind of dig into almost like, for a little pun intended, for the seed of the issue of what's going on. And sometimes you can also look back to an original event in their life where it's like, this is when this first happened, and now this situation is just amplifying that. And you can clear out both of those. So what the clearing looks like is that whichever of those meridian points on the wrists was supportive, you hold that point, and then the emotional meridian points are on the forehead here. So you hold that point, whichever it is, and then you place that other hand across the forehead here. So you're contacting both of them, and then you lean forward and you just breathe. Now, what happens when you start breathing is really, really variable for every single release, for every single person. Some people have like full body chills or like sweats, tinglies. I've had some where it's just like their heart rate accelerates, or they feel like it's hard to get like a deep calming breath, almost a little bit of hyperventilating. Others have like visual color changes, things happening with their eyes closed. Some like think up scenarios, or like have things that come to mind, like different memories, or like, oh, this connecting to this, like the dots kind of connect a little bit more. I always cry. I'm just a natural crier anyways. It doesn't take much for me, but it's just like some sort of physical releases tends to be what happens for me. And you just breathe through whatever is coming up. And once it's complete, you stand up from there. And then we just kind of muscle test up the ladder to make sure that all of the things along that path are clear as well. So that's what the whole spiel looks like.
Beautiful. That sounds so interesting. And I love that you're connecting into that emotional aspect of what's happening physically as well, which is stunning.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just had a friend who was having recurring UTIs, and she was like, I used to get these when I was really a lot younger, and I'm not sure like why they're coming back. And I was like, well, I'll do a clearing and see if we find anything. And I don't remember what the emotion was, but I do remember it was stored in the sexual organs, and it was stored there since she was 7. And I was like, well, that makes sense that it's been there that long, and it just had like phases of coming up. So it's been an interesting tool to correlate a lot of those things for sure.
Okay, I have to like two or three questions, but
Yeah,
because I just accumulated the information.
sure. Yeah.
Uh,
I sent a
the
lot your way.
yeah. Well, first, the easy one is just can you just define what is a UTI so that people that
Yeah.
don't have
It's,
those terms
yes, yep.
understand?
So that's a urinary tract infection. So it
Okay.
causes a lot of like burning type symptoms, frequent urination, feeling like you can't fully empty the bladder. You have to go all the time. It's typically a bacterial infection that people would be prescribed antibiotics. I know that D-mannose is a good like alternative kind of treatment for it also.
Mhm.
Just that's what's in cranberry juice that helps like it's something about it like keeps the bacteria off the bladder wall or something like that, where it can't like stay in there. Yeah, but it's an infection of the urinary tract.
Might have to do with the pH because the cranberry juice is acid,
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
kills the bacteria, and I think it clears the infection then.
hmm That yes, it's like whatever you got to do, get it out of there. I
Yeah,
have never had
exactly.
one, but I've heard they are brutal.
The other question is a little more deep. It's
Mhm.
what, how did you start to discover this relationship between your body and the way it showed you that there was something stored, such as an emotion or something like that? Was it always these skin reactions, or were different kind of symptoms that you start to associate it with the feelings or with the emotions?
It honestly, I guess now that I think about it, I the first few times that this happened, like I didn't put those things together. It just, especially with crying in my professor's office, that just happened and was what it was. When I had the really bad cramps, I was working with a health coach at the time. Him and I were really just trading services, and I again like I eat really well, I hydrate, I sleep, like I have all of those pillars of health in place. So then for something to be going wrong like that, I knew that I was missing something. I just didn't know what it was. And then he pointed out, he's like, I think because he had done a lot more of the mental emotional type coaching with different clients that he had. And so he was the one who pointed that out to me. He was like, this could be the missing piece. And then of course that elicited a very like emotional reaction within me because I knew that it wasn't the right relationship. I just didn't feel ready to do anything about it yet. But then, of course, in hindsight, you look at these things and you're like, I was ready because my body was telling me. It was telling me, like, you can no longer ignore this. Like, you need to address this at this point. So I guess even thinking about this is such a great question. It's great self reflection for me. But thinking about once it got to just this past year, I was seeking out NET because at that point I knew that something emotional was going on. So it really didn't click for me until then that I needed to find like some type of thing to clear this out of my system. So the great thing about NET is that it's not talk therapy. Like we do talk about what's going on a little bit and we do build a little bit of a story about what's going on. But the goal is to just like have physiological changes in your body so you don't react the same way to that situation. You can look at it more objectively. You can move forward in a more clear way. You can just, it's like taking colored glasses off where you're like, oh, this is what is actually going on. I can look at it more objectively. So I guess I innately knew like after that breakup that I was not living life that way. I was living in my swampy emotional mess and I didn't want to live that anymore and the physical symptoms were just I at that point knew that I'd had enough experiences with that. I knew that all the other foundational layers for health for me were in place. Nothing had changed other than that was had to be the missing link that was going on at that time.
Okay. And well, the last one, and then Natasha can contribute, of course, with more questions. Well, it's just I'm curious if these emotions, reactions, feelings, those that story that you try to clear with your patients, once you get to the point, once you have clarity on where is it or what organ or anything that is happening, because it can be multiple things, I assume. And what happens if the client or the patient is with you, it clears, but I don't know, they have 2 weeks and they are fine, but they don't change, because
Mm-hmm.
feelings, emotions need to be changed, or at
Mm-hmm.
least need to be acknowledged,
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
So this actually is a great question also. So that is literally why I brought human design into the mix, because I was like, if we are clearing out all of this stuff to make more space, like what we need to do moving forward needs to be different so we don't end up here again. So for women to understand, and really I would work with men too, but I just feel like I have a closer tie with women in general. But if they know like what their energy type is and how they're meant to move through the world and how they're meant to have opportunities come to them and make decisions and just like understand how they're meant to be on this planet, that is going to change everything about their lives, because most people have no idea. So that literally, when I talk about the analogy and why I call it seeds, I think of it as NET is like pulling the weeds. We're pulling out all the stuff we don't need anymore. We're clearing out the emotional garbage that's not serving us anymore. The fascial technique is more of like a physical unwinding. It's a hands-on technique. So anyone doing that virtually is not going to get that, but I can help them just clear their fascia on their own, a little DIY. But the emotional energy is truly stored within the fascia. So then actually physically unwinding that after an emotional release just helps that kind of like go off the charts, where it's like really works its way out. And then and so that's almost like tilling the soil. We're getting the soil ready for new stuff. And then human design is planting the correct seeds for your garden, like picking and choosing, like, now that I have this energy and more capacity, like, what do I want to build? What do I want to accomplish? How do I want to be in the world? And how is it best for me to be in the world to move forward differently? So that was a great question to segue into like how all these pieces have come together, because I totally agree. If you create the space for somebody and then they fill it with the same old stuff, they're going to be still looping, but in a different way. Like, it's very interesting working with people and working with emotions, and even like to an extent, as I'm sure you know, like making lifestyle changes, like making different choices and like really doing something differently instead of just knowing about doing something differently, is that I can't do it for them. They have to do it themselves. And there's only so much that I can do to like motivate them and inspire them. But at the end of the day, they have to want things to be different. And so having the least I can do, and the only thing I can do, is give them the information of how to do that. But it's still at the end of the day up to them. I can't do it for them.
yeah, I completely agree. And that was the question directed for, because I knew that you needed something. And I also think that human design is just like the book of your life
Yeah.
in terms of giving you an easier template
Mm-hmm.
to understand why you react with certain people like that, or with certain situations in that way. And also it relates the physical health that you might be affecting. So
Mm-hmm.
it is a very complete profile, and it is based on your energy. So what else can you miss in there?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. It's been such an interesting tool. I have not had anybody that I've like shared their human design chart with say like that just doesn't sound right. Like they're all totally mind blown. Like, how do you know this stuff? I'm like, I don't. I just read the chart. Like, it's just I have no control over what's coming up. But
Yeah.
it is interesting to read through a chart and see like different themes pop up. I've done it for a handful of people that are quite close to me, so I know them well. And I'm just like, oh, of course this is what's happening. Like, oh man. And I feel like it's always easier to analyze somebody else versus yourself. And as a projector, I feel like I get a double dose of that. That's what we're really good at, is seeing everybody else very clearly and not seeing ourselves as well. But I'm like, of course this is what's going on. Like, these are the things that gotta be shifted and changed around. But yeah, it's an amazing system. I have loved getting to know it and like play with it and just, help other people discover it.
Thank you.
I absolutely love that, because we bring in, so it is my belief that when illness finds itself in the body, it's already moved through that mental, emotional, before it finds itself in the physical. So I love that you have techniques that connect into all of those phases to see what is the origin of that. So we just briefly introduced human design. Would you be able to, both of you, or Sara, give like a general introduction to what is human design, and some people might get it confused with an astrological chart, but it's something completely different, which is beautiful. I've had a session before, which is amazing to find out like what is part of it, and you just see it all mapping out. But if you could do a quick introduction to what it is, that would be great.
Sure. The way I talk about it is that being a self-awareness alignment tool. It's all based on where and when you're born. So you enter that information, and they say that like you're imprinted essentially with the energy that's happening in the whole universe by the planets, all of that. So it does actually have some roots in astrology. It's kind of a blend of astrology, the I Ching, the Kabbalah tree of life, and the chakra system. So it's nice that it already contains wisdom from all of these ancient wisdom systems that have been around forever. And they're so wise and are like a depth of knowledge in and of themselves. My favorite part about human design is that it comes with the body graph, that like concrete, like visual of like how different we all are is, I just love that. So we have 9 different centers and they're loosely tied to the chakras. There's 2 extra ones. So there's 7 chakras and there's 9 centers. And then within each of those centers, there's different gates. And so when we're imprinted at birth, and then also 88 days before birth, we're imprinted twice with like our unconscious traits versus our conscious traits. But we're imprinted with that energy at that time. And so when you look at the chart, that's basically what's noted there is like, what are the energies that are there when you were born? But then it gets very complex, which I like, because for each one of the aspects of the human design chart, there's a high expression and then there's a low expression. So there's, even if somebody had the exact same chart, even if you had identical twins, they could be expressing things so differently that they would look very differently, even though they have kind of the same blueprint. But the idea is to kind of use that blueprint to figure out where your high and low expressions are so you can transmute those low expressions into high expression. And what that always comes back to is working your energy type, strategy, and authority. So I like that. In a way, it's very simple because it's like, it's like if something's going wrong, you go back up to this. And if something else is going wrong, like you also still go back up to this. Like it's a hierarchy. And that doesn't mean that it's easy. Like simple is not easy ever, but it like, at least like, okay, like once you learn what you need to do and like how you do things best, then it's like, okay, I know what I need to be doing. And then of course, again, it comes back to actually doing those things, but you at least have that roadmap of how to get back on track based on like what was imprinted upon you at birth.
Okay, that's fantastic. So I love that because I work very much with the soul's blueprint when I work within the Akashic records, and it almost just feels like that is also a visual representation of the themes that we've come to explore in this lifetime, which is absolutely beautiful to see it all kind of like mapped out in one way or another. So that's absolutely fascinating.
Yeah. And I think that it also combines this bioenergetic theme that as Sarah mentions, you can it doesn't label you into negative or positive. It just gives you as you mentioned, the high expression or low expression, and it's like our shadow and the part that we need to work or we need to address, and the other part that when we are thriving, when we understand what happened and we did something different, and then we get to that point where we find different kind of people or we attract the opportunities that we need because you are working with your energy, not against your energy. So that's something that I also love about it, that it just points out to you that sometimes when you want to follow society, when you want to follow trends, when you want to follow advice from other people, sometimes you might be against your own energy, and that's what is conflicting inside of you. And you don't notice that until you have the symptoms, of course.
Yeah. And then it's interesting I feel like a lot of us have to have those wins a few times before we put together like, wait a minute, this was working because I was doing this. Like, it's almost like until you have experiences with it, you don't believe that that is true. You know, if you're not used to working with yourself in that way, a lot of us have to like kind of fall off the rails a couple times. At least I did, to be like, okay, no, this is actually what we need to be doing. But I feel like that like just cultivates such a beautiful sense of self-trust and like groundedness and who you truly are. Like if I could have any wish for all the people on the planet, it would be for them to like deeply understand themselves, accept themselves, like know who they're meant to be on this planet, and like confident in going out and achieving that. Like what a better world would we have if everybody felt that way? So that's really what I feel excited and passionate about, is just for people to come home to themselves again.
Yeah.
That's beautiful, because that is what purpose is in life. And this experience absolutely is getting to know who we are as well. And moving through those kind of like those conditioning that we've been taught as well. So I find it I love having both of you doctors and kind of like bringing in all these aspects of who we are, which I find that so interesting. How did you find, well, I suppose you experienced it and then you had that help, but absolutely kind of like incorporating these things into, I mean, you spoke very much about at the beginning of speaking to these Western medical doctors being kind of like fixated in, you know, we'll just continue to put patches and fix whatever the symptoms are rather than getting to the root cause. Did that somehow birth kind of like that, okay, no, I need to find out what the root cause is, because otherwise it's never going to get like solved or resolved, I suppose.
Yeah. A lot of that, honestly, chiropractic school is a lot about that too. Like the philosophy within chiropractic is that the body is a self-healing, self-maintaining, self-regulating system, and it doesn't need any help. It just needs no interference. So when we experience interference for like physical injuries, like chemical toxins, things like that, like that's what disrupts that whole process. So within chiropractic, like that philosophy was really ingrained within me. And I also had the privilege of working at the office I work at now, but I worked there when I was in undergrad as a front desk person. So I was taught a lot about that before I even left for school as well. Just because without that background knowledge, it makes absolutely no sense of why a baby would come and get a chiropractic adjustment. They're like, they don't have back pain, they don't have neck pain, like maybe they have torticollis, but just like, why would a baby come for digestive issues and constipation? And it's like, well, the whole point of the spine is to protect the spinal cord and the nerve tissue, and that nerve tissue has to be able to communicate with the body. And so that's one way of interference, where if that communication is not happening and we can adjust that to open those communication lines, the body starts doing what it needs to do right away. So a lot of that, I feel like I am very blessed to have. I've had that for a long time. But then almost what got kind of more difficult was realizing that an adjustment was like not the only thing, because that was almost what we were taught at school, where like you just adjust them and that's all they're ever going to need ever to be good and great. But then like, well, then why am I having these hives, and why am I having this debilitating period pain and the stomach pain that won't go away? Like it just became very clear that that wasn't the only thing that was going to bring healing. And I, again, wasn't going to turn to the medical side again, because they'd already let me down. Like, sorry guys, I'm not going to give you another chance to disappoint me. Like I'm going to look at honestly the more crazy and more woo-woo stuff. But I also have done quite a bit with Joe Dispenza meditations, and he's big like possibility guy. And I think that is another thing that I have really learned, is just like always be open to possibility, because you just never know. Like I feel like I want to be surprised. I want to experience magic every day, but that requires quite a bit of openness. And I think that's all stuff that I've really like grounded in myself since learning human design and more about like how I was imprinted as well, where it's just like, I do want magic. Like I do want possibility. Like let's look for the crazy answers and see what happens. Like that's just very fulfilling to me, is like to experience magic all the time.
Beautiful.
I couldn't agree more that the more you trust your own intuition, the more that you trust that you can heal by just self-reflection in terms of asking questions to your own life and reflecting probably on a template like human design that makes you reflect a lot about your life and about the past events and things like that. You start assembling the pieces of the puzzle of your own journey, and then you come to realize that whenever you heal any kind of symptom, it's because you did the change in certain areas of your life.
Mhm.
And that's what is missing, I think, for many of us.
Mhm.
We don't have time because that's the best excuse that people give. Well,
Mhm.
best and worst, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't have time to do that. Well, if you don't have time, you will have to make the time at
Mhm.
some point, and it will be more painful and more expensive. So you better do the time
Mhm.
to reflect, to ask questions, and to change. Because
Mhm.
we are also many times against change,
Mhm.
and we don't like anyone to tell us that we have to change.
Mhm.
But when your body is telling you, well, you have to
Yes.
listen. No?
Like I got to do something. I
Yeah.
do wonder sometimes, especially with, I feel like I've had several very concrete examples of like just weird symptoms, emotional release, like addressing it somehow, and then the symptoms gone. I do wonder if that happens so readily for me because I do hold the belief that that's possible. I wonder if those types of results are possible for people who are more skeptical. I don't know yet, but that will be an interesting thing to have in the back of my mind to observe, where I think most people who are going to seek me out probably do have the same belief system, at least to an extent that I do. But even for the people who say it didn't work, like, could that just be because they were blocking that from happening themselves? Like, they weren't willing to accept that to be the answer anyway, so it was never going to work because they weren't actually open to it. And that's something I'll be interested to see if I see that. I hope not. I hope only people who are open and willing,
Well,
but I'm sure it will.
but from an extreme mover perspective, like it is the belief so for example, so I did Reiki, I did craniosacral therapy, and then I work within the Akashic Records, which is on the woo-woo kind of like spiritual kind of like spaces, like probably on the X side of the spectrum in that sense. But there is the belief system that as healers, because all doctors are healers as well, is that the only job that we have is to provide the healing frequency.
Mm.
And it's we bring to the table the knowledge, the wisdom, the frequency that is available to be for that healing to occur. But it's up to the client or the patient to receive that
Mm-hmm.
to the extent that they're ready to receive it as well. So in actual fact, it isn't really, it's like you say, if they're going to block it, or we can only take them as far as they're ready, as far as they're willing to go as well, because a lot of we start looking at the mental emotional aspect of it, is there is a benefit to holding on to part of it until it becomes so painful that we don't want to hold part of it. But I think it's very much that belief system when they come in, because I find those that really are like, I mean, I've had clients where within one session doing a somatic emotional release part of the cranial aspect, that we've released things like eating disorders or an alcohol addiction, because I think that the body, the mind was just ready to release that at that point. And really it's just providing that frequency that we're able to support that. And it's quite good because there's been a lot more studies coming in from that space of like healing and frequency in hertz, where we look at what is the amount of energy that is needed to rebuild bone or organs and things like that, and then the energy that's coming out of a practitioner's hands. But like our minds are so powerful, and I think when we are ready, the right person shows up for us, but they can only take us as far as we're willing to go, because it's entirely up to us, which is very, very fascinating. Because I've had that happen earlier on when I was doing Reiki, where I was treating somebody and I could feel the energy coming out of my hands, but I couldn't feel the body absorbing it. And I was like, what is going on? What's wrong? I was like, first of all, I was like, am I doing something? And then my guides were like, some people say they want to heal it, but they're not ready to heal it because it suits them where they're at. So I was like, okay, that I understand that now. It's okay. I can completely see that. But it was fascinating in that sense. And then I've had other clients that have been on the table that they absolutely absorb as much energy. And I'm like sweating, trying to all of that energy through and creating that space. And then they go into kind of like 2 days of kind of like sleep, and they come out of it and it's like, it's done. And I'm like, okay. we can do it, but it's not up to us, it's up to them. So I absolutely agree with you. We provide that environment, but it's up to them. And I suppose it's like even with normal medicine, it's like the placebo effect as well, or the
Yes.
nocebo effect.
Mm-hmm.
So it's all in our belief systems and what we're ready for, I think.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking too. It's like, are these things really going on, or is it just because I so strongly believe it? I'm like, well, I don't care. It solved my problem, so I am good. I feel like the more that I go on with these things, I feel like less of a need to like thoroughly explain what's happening, and it's more of just acceptance.
Mm-hmm.
Like, thank you so much for bringing this my way. Like, I'm so glad that this was able
Yeah.
to help me out. Like, I don't know. Again, maybe it's just embracing the magic, or I'm like, nobody needs to explain magic. Like, it just is magic, and that's it. So,
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
I can share two stories about these healing experiences. One is with a client that was an ex-colleague of a company where we worked together. She had a very let's say persistent issue with smoking,
mm,
and she couldn't let the addiction of nicotine. She tried and she did it once in a clinic, and she could just sustain it for 2 or 3 years, which was a good point. But then
Mm.
she approached me and we did a specific plan for her. And I designed meditations and I designed exercises of mainly writing down things. And she had like more or less once a month we got together with sometimes in person, sometimes through a phone call, because it was more or less during the pandemic. And she told me like 6 months later or a year later that she had time now to do all the meditations, to do all of the guidance that I gave her. And she told me, you know what? I finally got rid of the cigarette. So I wanted to thank you and to let you know that I did it, and it's not coming back because I don't feel that anxiety and that need to do it. And she was an acceptic, so I can think that she was ready,
mm-hmm.
as Natasha was mentioning. She opened her own energy field so that those healing, let's say, powers come through her. And she started to do the work, of course, of journaling, of doing the meditations. So it's not just sitting down and thinking that you are going to heal, it's doing something different that we have been
Mm.
mentioning. And the other experience was when I was also doing this the Reiki courses that I have just finished. And in one of the sessions that we had, there were like 3 or 4 people that were coughing. And then the teacher started a long meditation so that we could relax and then do some Reiki with each other. And during that long meditation, that was like 30 minutes almost, or 40 minutes, something like that, because you lose track of time when you are meditating so long. Then I just noticed that no one was coughing. So in that room, the energy was so powerful that the cough just went off, and they didn't cough during the next 2 or 3 hours that lasted the class. So those are two things that I can just think of where we can point out to the environment that we are creating, which is what Joe Dispenza is trying to do with the sessions. He's trying to take you to another place, to another point of no time and no
Mm-hmm. Yes. Oh my gosh,
no
yes.
physical form, where you just release everything and you let that energy come to you. So
Mm-hmm.
I think that's what happens when we are in those sessions, or when we by ourselves, when we do it. Probably we have a session with someone, with any one of us, and we don't heal in that session. But next in your life, when you have time, when you really have the intention, you do it, and then it works because you are already open and
Mhm.
because you are already in that place where the energy can flow, no?
Yeah. It's interesting with the time thing. I think that does come up a lot. But I know in one of my calls with Natasha in the last few months, she said that there's always time for you. And I was like, that has like literally changed my life. Even today, I had to go back to my dog's groomer to pick up his collar because I left it. And I was like kind of rushing. I was like, I got to be back in time for this podcast. And then I was like, no, there's plenty of time. There's always time for me. And then I was just like, enjoyed my drive and it was all good. But I mean, I think a great use of that would just be like, there is always time. I feel like the quote, I don't know exactly how it goes, but it's essentially like, you have to make time for your health. Otherwise, eventually you'll be forced to. So like, at what point do you want to choose to make the time or do you want to be forced to make the time? Essentially is what it comes down to.
Yeah.
It's quite interesting in the sense of kind of like working with all the different organs and what emotions they hold. So do you start to look, and then I know with Chinese medicine, there's a lot of organs that are paired as well. So do you start looking at, okay, so it's like, what are you feeling? What are you going through? And then have an indication of, okay, I'm going to be working on X, Y, and Z organ, and I'm going to be working on this, this, and this in the spine. And I'm going to be, usually it's an indication of that. Is that, do you map it out all like that as well?
I haven't.
Or do you do it the other way,
well,
from the bones to the emotions?
Well, it's usually with using NET. I guess I honestly I don't correlate it a ton to chiropractic, other than like if somebody has like chronic stuff like between shoulder blades or in their neck, like people who have like the same things coming on all the time. I do think I'm like, all right, something else is driving this show. Like this is just like the Band-Aid. You know, this is like a better Band-Aid than ibuprofen, but it's still a Band-Aid if we're like, but some people are good with that Band-Aid. I'm like, sick, like come and see me every month at the office then if you want that. But I can usually tell when people ask me like, how can I prevent this from coming on? So I don't do a ton. I keep chiropractic at the office, but with NET, it's always like kind of starting from scratch and then finding like, and then just like going in from there to figure out like which organ and which like emotion is going on. But I have found that like it does correlate a little bit with, I've started to look up people's like Chinese New Year charts. Oh my gosh, I can't think of the proper term for it, but they always come up with what's called a lucky element. And your lucky element is actually what you're lowest in, where it's like you need more of this to become lucky. And I've started to find that a lot of people store their lucky element. And it's almost, I'm curious if people are not getting enough of a certain element, if they will hang on to emotional baggage to almost fill that void. Like, for instance, fire is lacking in my chart. And I have fire related meridian things cleared all the time. Like it's small intestine, thyroid, adrenals, things like those are just the things that tend to come up the most often. When I had the thing in my gut, that was small intestine and fire related. So that got me wondering about that. Like, interesting, if my body's trying to, like, in its own way, hang on to what I'm lacking in life. But if I go and seek out more fire type experiences, like literally like sitting in front of a fire, being in the sun, like if that would satisfy that, where I hang on to less of that stored energy within myself. So I don't know about the pairings of the organs. I'd have to look into that. I do really want to learn more about like why each organ is in the category that it's in. Like some of them, like the kidney and the bladder, make sense with water. Like, yes, that's the urinary system. Like that's water based. So that makes sense. I'm like, but why are these guys fire? Like, why is the large intestine metal, but the small intestine is fire? Like why those are things that I haven't learned yet, but I would love to, because I feel like there's a lot of patterns yet to be discovered within all of that. And like, so I feel like I'm kind of like searching all the time for the patterns, like trying to frantically search for what's there. And that doesn't work. You have to calmly observe to find the patterns anyways. But I like get hot on the trail of one idea and I'm like, well, that actually didn't pan out. But I know that there are patterns there just waiting to be discovered. And I'm so excited to like find them.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And I wonder if you can bring in those elements through your food as well.
Yes.
Right?
There
like
is
eating more spicy foods and things like that as well, which is amazing.
Yes. And then there's even like, well, and in human design, I have a book that talks about like different supporting crystals for each type, or different essential oils that are more grounding for each type. And those are helpful too. I I'm glad I have a reference book for that, because I do not know those off the top of my head at all. And I don't know what the pattern is for those either, but I mean, it just makes perfect sense that you would be able to support those things in all of the ways. Like even with the lucky element, they were talking about different ones. I can't remember which is which, but like having your bedroom face the south side of the house, or having your office face the south side is going to be more grounding for you. I'm like, oh, like that could be such a simple thing to do just to feel more grounded through your work days. Have your desk face a certain way if you have the freedom to move that around. Just like really simple things like that. But when you think about like the energetic shift in things, like of course that makes sense. But again, to people who are not in this world, be like, what the hell are you talking about? They need to have an experience with it, but those are simple things to change that hopefully you wouldn't meet too much resistance with, because it's like, you got nothing to lose by moving your desk. Like, give it a try.
But that brings into the kind of like the conversation of kind of like looking at another Chinese kind of like, I suppose, modality of the feng shui, right? And how to that energy of space and allowing the energy to flow within your space. And I find it so fascinating because I know an extremely successful interior designer that works for business, and she's actually, through that placement and through looking at feng shui and through looking at the organization, has managed to kind of like up the production of an accounting team by like X percentage, just by placing things in the right space, in the right order, in the right direction to really make it conducive. She's actually saved businesses like tons of money just from that energetic kind of like placement. Absolutely. Which I find fascinating.
That's one of my mentors talks about gains and drains, and that feels like that's like stopping up the little drains, like the little things that you don't notice as often. But like if you can seal those off, then it's like then the water levels just continue to rise in a good way. It's like you're not losing anything out the bottom. Like so then of course it's going to go up from there. All those little things just really do add up.
Yeah, and all of those things sound for the skeptics like magic, but it is just the same thing. It's energy. It's energy that we are moving through the things. It's energy that we are moving through the space that we are cohabitating, even with someone. And that's why also where people don't really have good relationships with close spaces, or when you are feel that you are being tight or something like that. So I'm one of that. So I need more freedom, more space, and I need more silence now sometimes than other people, and sometimes the just the crowds or the noise drains my energy so much that I need 2 days to recover from that. So
for sure.
Yeah.
But then what valuable information for you to have that, just to know like, okay, like I want to do this thing, but it's going to take me 2 days to feel good again. Just like, and for everybody around you, especially you said you're a manifesting generator. So to inform everyone around you, it's like, okay, like I'm down to do this. I want to, but then I'm going to need this much time to myself to recharge, and just like letting the people know that. Just, I don't know. I just feel like life can be so much more smooth when you know what you need. You're able to ask for it. Like you tell the people around you what you need. Like that's almost seems like a lost art in humanity, to be honest.
Because many of us don't do it, and we let the other person guess what you're thinking. Guess what you like or you don't like. So that's also a cause of conflict and problems and things. No?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So
yep.
How can we wrap up this journey into what you can tell people that you can help them with in terms of finding their own seeds? What would be the message for them?
Well, I mean, anyone can look up their own human design chart, honestly. Like you can go to any of the free tools. If you have your birth information, you can look it up. There are so many great resources out there, so many different perspectives on books and things. It can get a little dense to digest it all. So I do think it is. I started by looking my own up, and then I had my chart read to me a couple times as well by different people. And it's always interesting to have it like different perspectives and different readers will tell you kind of different things about that. So you can always start there, looking at those things, and just like feeling like, wow, this really resonates. Like this could be something that I could dive into. My website is live now, so they can always schedule with me. I can even do virtual appointments. Again, that does not include the CFT because that's a hands-on manual fascial technique, but I can give you work to do around your fascia at home to help with that. And I'd be happy to look at all those things. But I think if somebody wanted to kind of DIY some of this, like looking up their own chart and just looking at some of those aspects, is even the very like overarching themes can be extremely impactful for people to read about and learn. And just like, yeah, so because human design, it goes so deep. You can learn so many details about yourself with that. But even the very basic, like overarching concepts are very, very good tools for people to have and are easy to access, honestly.
Yeah.
And how do people get a hold of you? What is your URL? What is your email?
So my website at the moment is just Instagram. So my handle is Seeds by Sara, and it's seeds by Sara. And then my link to my Jane app, which is how you schedule, is just within Instagram. So it's all very condensed down just in one place there.
Perfect.
Beautiful.
We will also put it in the comments and in the description of this podcast. Well, we just have to thank you for such an enlightening conversation where we had fun with your journey and with all the reflection that we did with the things that happened to us also, and tell the people. I think the only thing that I can say is that you can heal your own symptoms whenever you have the time to do it.
Absolutely. Yeah, whenever you make the time to do it.
Make the time, yes.
Yeah, I love this conversation, especially because a few years ago, I had this vision of medicine changing. And we're looking at the body from a physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual perspective. And I've seen kind of like a lot of practices bringing in individuals that specialize in these different areas as well, or combination of them. And I love that as a doctor, and both of you as doctors are bringing in a lot of these elements that weren't part of that curriculum, and it makes it amazing in a sense, because I've always believed that Eastern and Western, traditional, non-traditional medicines can work together, and this actually really is truly inspiring to see both of you tackling the body from all aspects and not just from a physical perspective. So yeah, I would encourage anyone to look at any kind of practitioner that has a broader spectrum that could only support them on all levels. So yeah, absolutely love that. So thank you for doing what you're doing. That's amazing.
We'll have to have another podcast in like 2 years to see what we've discovered by then.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
We will.
I'm telling you, I know the patterns are going to emerge. We're going to see all kinds of new stuff we weren't seeing before. It's going to be fun times. I'm excited.
Yeah.
I'm excited too.
Thank you. Thank you, Sara. Thank you, Natasha. And
yes.
thank you everyone for listening. Ask questions and contact us, of course, if you want any kind of help. And just thank you for being here.
Bye. Yes, thank you guys for having me.
Absolutely.